Good morning. It's June 22nd. I would like to welcome everyone at Ukraine Media Center at Ukrinform. It's been 10 days of the war, and today is the 438th day of the full-scale invasion. And traditionally, I would like to say thanks to all the media representatives who are covering our heroic resistance, who are telling the world the truth about this war. Today, we have invited you to present the analytical report, the report which is called Bryansk to Irkutsk, what happens with Ukrainian POWs in Russian captivity. The experts of the Media Initiative for Human Rights, MIHR, which is part of the 5 AM coalition, have collected the information, have analyzed it, and today they are presenting this analytical report to us. And they will tell what they managed to learn about the conditions in which Ukrainian POWs are kept in the aggressor state. The speakers are Tetiana Katrichenko, the coordinator of MIHR, Maria Klimnik, an investigative reporter of MIHR, Andriy Yakovlev, a lawyer, an expert of the MIHR, and also we have Irina Latesh, which is a relative of POW, and Natalia Epifantsova, who is the head of the NGO Voyetsky Vyzvyl, and she also is a relative of a POW. So, Tetiana, I suggest you start this conversation. What have you managed to learn? What the analysis shows, and what is the information that you've received from liberated Ukrainian POWs about the conditions in which they had been kept. Greetings, dear reporters, dear colleagues. Thank you for coming to this event. It's indeed a very important event. We would like to say thanks to the Renaissance Foundation who supported this project, and I will explain why I mentioned this at the beginning. This topic of captivity, detention, transfer of POWs, it's very important on the one hand, and it's not investigated enough on the other hand, because sometimes it's not comfortable and scary and gruesome. That's why some people find it reluctant to research this topic. And the Media Initiative for Human Rights has been dealing with this topic from the moment we were created. We've investigated the places of captivity in the occupied territories before February the 24th, 2022, when you were the Ukrainian military service persons were kept, and starting summer 2014, essentially, we did this work. Very often we were and we are doing this pro bono because we understand that we cannot lose time or witnesses of these events. So the work which we are presenting today, the places of captivity in Russian Federation, it's all part of the general work which we've been doing for quite a long time, but it has this new aspect to us. In the occupied territories, we know about every detention facility, and we could learn about new places which were opened in the occupied territories. But the territory of Russian Federation before the full-scale invasion, well, they haven't been keeping Ukrainian citizens there. Well, unless, yeah, there were some cases when Ukrainian citizens were kept in Crimea and then transferred to Moscow and Rostov. And now Russian Federation continues to use the same detention places in Moscow and Rostov, but now they have added a large set of other places where they keep Ukrainian citizens, both civilians and military service persons. Today we're talking about the military specifically, and it's a lot of Ukrainian citizens who were transferred into the Russian Federation territory. Thousands. And it's obvious that Russian Federation does not have enough space to keep all of them. In the beginning of the invasion, Russia had this idea that they will finish this so-called special military operation fast, and they have booked a few jails and penal colonies in the regions neighboring Ukraine, in Kursk, Belgorod, Bryansk, Rostov, Voronezh. There they just ensure they have the capacity to keep Ukrainian civilians and military service persons. But later they understood that the plans they had were unimplementable, so they started transferring service persons deeper into the Russian Federation area. Now we get news that some were kept in Irkutsk, which is really far, deep into the territory of the Russian Federation. And honestly, I feel a bit too emotional, but I started even studying Russian geography better. I didn't want to do this initially, but now I know all the regions and how these places are named. For example, places like Pakino and Kakhma, Halich and Kashin, the places which previously, like, I never even heard about them. It's not a positive experience, of course, but it's important to know these small towns where they have jails or colonies, because we want to track our citizens, because the Russian Federation regularly and continuously transfers the citizens in such a way that it tries to conceal it. We are not even certain that we are able to find, or we will be able to find, all the Ukrainian citizens in Russia. The colleagues will tell more about the conditions of captivity, because we have interviewed over 5 dozen service persons who were released from captivity. We tried to interview them to learn as much as possible about every place of captivity, and in the interviews we saw some bits of information that were corroborating each other, like Novozhivkovo in Bryansk Oblast or Kursk jail. We know quite a lot about those, but the geography expands, and it's important to understand that in these 40+ places of captivity there are no outside observers usually, and in those places some terrible things happen. It's torture. We know about deaths of service persons in captivity, when due to unknown reasons they died, and well, the body is returned as part of the bodies exchange. This is scary because very young, healthy people were dying. Yeah, there might be additional questions, and I will continue. Now I give the floor over. We know that you had a chance to talk to the POWs. So what were they saying about the conditions of captivity? Greetings. We could follow a trend in the answers of all the POWs, regardless whether they were close to the border with Ukraine or deep in Russia. The conditions were the same. They had the same admissions phase when they were brought into the jail or colony. They were beaten up, and all those released from captivity said that it was even called like a registration procedure. The next procedure was taking biological samples and fingerprints, so that later, if they end up in the territory of Russian Federation, they would be apprehended again. Next, the POWs are distributed among the cells, and usually there's not enough capacity for a lot of POWs. So lots of military service persons said that additional beds were installed, were welded in their cells, because the Russians, well, are just over capacity. So the 4-bed rooms are now hosting 8 or 10 people, and they just installed new beds there. And the most difficult thing, as most interviewees say, is that they don't have food. Food is not provided. The only thing they got to eat was some really bland, no meat, no fruits or vegetables, and it's only the bread that they got in the adequate amount, and this is how they could survive. But we saw the pictures of those released from captivity. We see how they lost weight, so we understood that nutrition must have been very, very bad in captivity. And most people released, they said the same phrase, regardless of the place of captivity where they were, is that if you are taken out of a cell, there's a high chance that you'll be beaten. You'll be beaten up. For them, every moment they were taken out of the cell was scary, because you were either interrogated and also you were beaten up, or you were taken outside to the yard for a walk, but they were also beaten up there, like in Voronezh region. They used service dogs to bite people, to tear the clothing. It was just an entertainment for the guards there. Some interviewees joked that they just practiced on us. Also, there was lack of health care. Even if a person needed a medic urgently, well, it took quite a long time to get care. Either the medic denied care or could just give a pill of Validol, which is a menthol pill essentially, which was the panacea, which was treating everything. And there were also cases when a medic kind of provided care, but either just punched in the back or provided some psychological pressure. So there were not many kind of positive reviews about these places of captivity. The guards there enjoyed having power over Ukrainian POWs, and they tried as much as possible to just oppress them, both physically and psychologically, because the Ukrainian service persons didn't have any information about the events in Ukraine. All the information they had was twisted, was distorted. Those who were taken in the beginning of the invasion, they didn't know much. They could only get some bits and pieces of information from other people who were captured later. This was the only way to get some news from Ukraine. And in some places of captivity, they didn't allow people outside for a walk. So for like half a year, people stayed in their cell. They didn't see sunlight. They didn't know the day and the month. So like in the films, you see these signs scraped out on walls to mark time. This is what they did. Also, many people said that it was very difficult to be deprived of communication. When a new person was added to the cell, everyone was afraid to talk because they didn't know who the newcomer is and whether this information disclosed to that person can end up with serious consequences. And it was really difficult mentally. We know that there were a few cases of death resulting from the fact that the prisoners in the places of captivity, first of all, they already have weakened immunity, especially those who were for quite a long time in the Illich factory or Azovstal. They already had weakened immunity. Plus, they were beaten up. They also had the electrocution devices applied on them. And it all, of course, has an impact. Plus lack of health care, it is a significant health impact. So these young guys, 20, 30 years old, they had heart attacks. They had heart attacks because of the conditions they were put into. Would it be correct to say that all Ukrainian POWs are getting torture? We know cases when not only men but also women were subject to torture, so there's no difference. Whoever had arms in their hands is presumed by as the guilty ones by the Russians. A question. We also had comments that the prisoners of war were subjected to information pressure. They had to listen to the Russian anthem and so on. Answer. Yes, of course. The Russian anthem is a must. Everywhere in the Russian territory, the morning starts from the Russian anthem. You have to remember the words by heart. You have to sing it. If you forget even a word, you'll be punished. So, the Russian music, Russian anthem, daily, they have to listen to it. Andrei, if we talk about the legal component in terms of international law, what is your assessment of all the events, of everything that happens with the Ukrainian POWs? Greetings. Of course, it is a war crime. Why is this a war crime? Perhaps someday it will also be qualified as a crime against humanity. Why? Because we see that everyone gets beaten up. Beaten up for a known reason, just for fun, and this practice cannot be explained by military necessity or anything else. It's important to understand that prisoners of war are not criminals. They're just people who are isolated from the hostilities with one person to weaken the opponent. They are isolated, they are deprived of liberty, but they are supposed to come back to their motherland sometime in the future, and they have all other rights. They have the rights for correspondence. The Geneva Convention guarantee at least 4 letters or postcards. And this communication with the external world is one of the main guarantees. Why is this important? Why is it important to talk about it? Because, let's imagine, there are thousands of people who are deprived of all the rights. They are beaten up daily as some sort of punishment or for fun, and the report shows that we had information that the food was eaten first by the guards and just the leftovers were given to the prisoners. They are malnutritioned. The Geneva Conventions say that, well, the nutrition should be provided at such a level that the person would not lose weight. We see it's a breach of the Geneva Conventions. And torture, of course it's a crime. This is the answer in brief. Thank you. Irina, we would ask you to join this conversation and to share your experience. What have you and your family encountered? Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. Unfortunately, I also have this negative experience. In my family, a person who is really close to me is in captivity. Well, I had the conversation with my husband, who also was in captivity, and with other people who were POWs. So to add to the colleagues, I would like to say that as opposed to the places of captivity in the occupied territories of Ukraine, where sometimes they even allow the volunteers to give some food parcels to the prisoners of war, or sometimes there is some access to mobile phones. Yeah, it might be illegal, but the guards sometimes allow that. But those who are in the territory of the Russian Federation, they do not have that opportunity. And yeah, of course, there's no communication, no letters to the family. Like, my family received one letter from a person in captivity. It was like a year ago. We were so happy. I thought, okay, if his right hand is writing, if his head understands what he's writing about. At least he's alive and healthy. And the guys who came back, the last time I talked to a person who came back from captivity on June 11th, but in, for example, Voronezh region, they are starting weighing the prisoners, and they were really surprised why they're losing weight. Like my husband lost, I would say, lost 30 kilos of weight as of June. In terms of healthcare, it's also very difficult. As Maria said, well, there are some physical manipulations. This is the way of giving healthcare. If you complain for like headache or stomach ache, once in 3 days you would get just a pill, and you don't know what that is. Is it ibuprofen, or is it another analgesic agent, or something for the stomach? They don't know what that is. Also, I don't know how healthcare is provided to people with severe wounds. I only have some general information from open sources, but those who have minor health issues, well, it's just disregarded. If you have a stomach ache, it's better not to tell about it, because after that you'll get your ribs broken and you'll have many more places aching in your body besides the stomach. Also, people released said that in the Voronezh region, for example, they started getting these walks outside. Indeed, before that, they were not allowed. They didn't understand whether it was day or night, because 24/7 the lights are shining in the cell, the windows are painted over, so you don't understand what day of and what hour that is. So they are just waiting for the announcement that it's time to sleep. And this announcement comes at different hours too. We must know that from the wake up until the sleeping time, they cannot sit on their bed or they cannot lay on their bed. For quite some time, they were not allowed to sit at all, even on the floor. They had to stand. They couldn't even walk, and they were punished for that. So they were finding some angles where people could stand around the person, and the other person could sit for some time. Now it's allowed to sit on the bench, but if there are 8 people in the room but only 4 can sit at benches, then also they have to take shifts sitting. So it's inhumane treatment. They just want to denigrate people, to humiliate them. In some places, people are kept in captivity from late February, and they are isolated from any information. When they come back, they still ask whether Kiev is still occupied, because they remember how it started, and they don't know that Kharkiv is liberated and Kherson is liberated. The guards cannot talk to prisoners. If you ask a question, if you ask what time is it, or if you have a request, I don't know, of healthcare or something, you won't get the response, and you will have you will get some pressure. So that's why the prisoners are not using that at all. Thank you, Natalia, for sharing your experience. Natalia, thank you. And our organization, for over a year, is protecting the rights of the relatives of the POWs, and we are trying to search for them. We still can't find some people from Mariupol, but for many we managed to establish the place of captivity unofficially, and it's a great problem for the POWs, as that Russia is trying to conceal, they are concealing the majority of POWs. So Ukrainian service persons encounter this huge issue. In the NGOs, amongst ourselves, we estimate that it's at least 10,000 POWs in captivity in Russia at the moment. And most are not confirmed by Russia. Even those who left Azovstal and the International Committee of Red Cross were witnessing there, they were filling in some forms, but even people who were captured in the presence of ICRC, they are not confirmed by Russia. So the ways to search for them were different. We have some opportunities, but not all of them are working. For example, there are Russian Telegram channels where they publish videos where we can find this video and the confirmation that this person is alive. Because after Mariupol, we saw the situation that for many service persons, we didn't even know if they were alive. Also, there is the Russian Bar Association, and they were helping. Now this option is also no longer open for us, but in 2022 and early 2023, they helped us find the location, the whereabouts, and get some official confirmation. Also, there are Ukrainian volunteer groups who work both in Ukraine and on occupied territory, so they visit these colonies. It's still not clear how they get inside, but that thing is purely unofficial, and in this way we also can find some information about the places of captivity. And this January, February and March, these volunteers showed us a lot of video from a penal colony in Gorlivka. We don't know why that happened, but then they opened accounts and started saying that they need lots of money for the repairs, for the clothing, the shoes. So I think they just wanted to financially abuse the grieving relatives. And those who were released said, of course, no repairs was done and no clothing was issued. So it was just blackmailing. Yeah, essentially they released the video so that the relatives would see. They gave the opportunity to exchange emails, and then if you don't give money, you'll not have the opportunity to communicate further. The ICRC also is another way to get some information. Slowly, they try to find these, well, not find, but they receive the confirmation. The Ukrainian Red Cross contacts the Geneva office contacts Moscow Red Cross, Moscow Red Cross contacts Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, and this is a long chain, but we do get some information, we do get some confirmation, but there are only a few. You have them? Yes, we have them, but only a few. For like a month or two we've been getting them, but really few. Also, there is another way to search. According to the international law, there is the UN work group on forcible disappearance. So we have been sending queries there. We've had cases of them hearing the situation on our requests, but they are really ineffective. Also, I must note that UN work group on enforced disappearance, it's based in the UN headquarters in Geneva. This HQ is headed by Tatiana Volovaya, a Russian official. So we asked if the administrator of the HQ cannot provide conditions for your work, because this work group said that we've invited Russian representatives to come to our hearings, but they just were not showing. So we are asking if the administrator, if the Director General of this HQ cannot provide the conditions for your group to work. Why are you not raising this question? And I felt like they're really careless. They lack initiative. So the most productive source of getting the information about our prisoners of war, it's the returnees. They are the most productive, the most joyful source, because they saw these people, they were retelling stories, and they share the stories of their families, and we do get this information from the returnees, from the returned POWs, but we still don't have the official confirmation that these people are there as POWs. So officially, these people are still missing. I would like to respond. First of all, I've heard your speech about dignity, about the way to cooperate with the Russian Federation, which is ignoring all the requests. I like that speech, but I would like to note one more thing. If you say that it's a really ineffective mechanism and one shouldn't contact it, I would disagree. The thing is, it's not that they always help. No, sometimes they don't help, but they communicate with the Russian Federation. They keep nagging. So, for the people included in the request by these organizations, there's a much higher chance that they will stay alive and in good conditions. So the more Russian Federation is nagged with requests about some people, the higher is the chance that these people will be protected, because they are already registered and recorded somewhere. So in that speech, when you said that the UN has to figure out how inside of the UN there's an organization that ignores its principles, well, I don't know. Let's imagine there is such a response measure as boycott or silent treatment, but the Russian Federation would respond to all the requests, even if it's boycotting them. And also, we have to talk about the humanity, the humaneness. Like you said, first the prisoners were only allowed to stand, then they were allowed to sit. So it shows that this process of the humaneness increase is possible. And I think this is where we have to focus. There are different ways to do it. The Red Cross is one of the ways, because we think we have to remind about the value of human life, and it will somehow trickle down to the POWs. Andrei, your point of view is that if we managed to make someone's name public, there's a higher chance that this person will stay alive and will have a higher chance of coming home. That is correct, especially, for example, when we talk about the medics. They are called combat medics in Ukraine, but they are medical personnel. And medical personnel, just as severely wounded people, they have additional protection under the conventions. So it makes no sense to keep the severely wounded people in captivity. So yes, we have to contact all the UN bodies. Of course, we have to ring all the bells. This would increase the chances. I would like to comment on this. With regards to the point whether we should make the names public or not, communicating in public, I think it is not advisable. We shouldn't disclose all the names because the Russian side monitors Ukrainian social media, they monitor our discussions. I'm sure they will monitor this event too, and sometimes people who are highlighted, so to say, they get worse treatment and they don't understand why. Like those two cases which were described in this report, with regard to the deaths, as far as I know, these people were confirmed by ICRC and the Russian Federation, and they got back from captivity in coffins. You see, so saying that making the names public would protect them, I think we have to make the issues public, not names. And as Andrei said, yeah, of course we have some sort of impact on the conditions of captivity. So if we talk about comprehensive issues, if we make it public, yeah, it can work. I would like also to draw the attention, because most probably the relatives of prisoners of war who were only recently captured will also watch this. I would like to ask them to communicate on social media less. When some people were describing all the details, where he was stationed, who was the commander, what was the unit number, when was he disappearing. I mean, that is not advisable. If you have some information about your loved one, you should communicate it rather narrowly with the ICRC, with the Coordination Committee on POWs, with UN organizations or NGOs which are engaged in the search of POWs, or like the MIHR. They are dealing with this sort of communication, but let's not make it too public. Thank you. That's a good advice. And now, if the colleagues would like to ask a question or comment, over to you. Hello. I am also a mother of a POW. I do have a confirmation from the Russian side and from the ICRC, but I do not have a communication channel. I got one letter sent by my son in May. I've sent 3 letters and they didn't reach the destination. I contacted the ICRC, I was writing in English, in all sorts of languages. I wrote to the UN, to Geneva. I have like 3 folders of different petitions. I thought I could write to any organization. I got no response. I don't know where he is. What is his condition? It's been over a year. I don't know in which jail is he kept. I've written to the MIHR, to the coordination team. As Natalia said, they collect the information. And still, it's always a question, because the POWs get transferred all the time. So, what should I do? Which algorithm should I follow to know about the situation with my son, where he is, if he is in any lists, and how can he be returned? Also, you've mentioned the lawyers. I'm ready to hire any lawyer if the lawyer really helps locating my son. We heard that there's only Mykola Polozov who deals with the search of POWs. I sent a request to him, there was no response. So what do I have to do? Where do I find this lawyer? Like, how do I resolve these issues? It's not only my problem. We have a whole group on Facebook from the Marines. We have over 5,000 of mothers like me, and we all don't know uh, where to go. Tatiana, would you comment? Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for telling about this issue, about this situation. It's important to understand that there are thousands and dozens of thousands of families in the same situation. We understand that the state of Ukraine, here I'll be defending the state in this instance. The state, especially in the beginning, it couldn't cope with such a huge amount of requests. And indeed, the POWs are constantly transferred from one location to the other. Like in Novosibkiv, they all were kept in the same place, in particular the representatives of the 36th Marine Brigade, and now they were transferred to two other locations. So, how we are searching the information? We get information interviewing the service persons. I know that the state bodies also are asking all the time, who was there in your cell? Who was in neighboring cell? Do you know any names? So they can tell the family that they saw this or that service person. It's just sometimes the place is not clear because they were transferred all the time. The representatives of the UN Human Rights Mission are also interviewing the released POWs. As far as I know, as of March, over 400 POWs were interviewed. And they also contact the families and they disclose the information which they managed to get. Also, the ICRC informs the families. We've been talking a lot about their inactivity, but in the recent months they managed to visit several places of captivity in both occupied territory and in the territory of the Russian Federation, and they also notify families. But there is this peculiarity that the ICRC sometimes says that they don't have contact information of specific families to inform them. Like yesterday we had this case when ICRC knew the location of one Ukrainian citizen, but they didn't apply any effort to find the family of that person, to notify them, even though they understood that there were requests to ICRC, to the family, they just couldn't find the phone number in the database. And it's really important. ICRC must know all your contact information, and you must double check that they have this information. This probably is it. These are the sources I can name. The interview with the returnees, the state body, this coordination HQ, which will probably say that this person was seen, but they will not say where, the UN Human Rights Mission and the ICRC. And these kind of volunteers which act in the occupied territories, but that's valid only for the occupied territories. With regards to the Russian lawyers, yes, we cooperate with the Russian lawyers. There is some limited cooperation, of course, but we understand that every request now in the territory of the Russian Federation, can lead to the person being transferred to a different place. If we have an assumption where they are, it also would be quite a traumatic experience for that person, because once again they will have to undergo this quote-unquote admissions procedure. It's really complicated. And it's difficult. There's just a huge number of military service persons, and the state is trying to find each and everyone. But on the other hand, we understand that sometimes the state is failing at this stage to respond to the questions. So
I always recommend families to come together with other families to search on their own and to try to inform the coordination HQ about the results. Because if we just keep sending requests, I think they're just overwhelmed with the sheer number of the requests. And also, I'd like to add to highlighting specific names. It's complicated. Why? Before February the 24th, we knew that there are service persons in captivity, those who were captured in Debaltsevo, in Ilovaisk, and in other places, in Donetsk airport. We understood that they've been in captivity for quite a long time, and the names of many of those were highlighted. The families gave interviews, and not all of them were even service members, some were civilians. So after the release, the service persons and the civilians said that yes, my wife or my daughter contacted the president's office, she spoke to the media, and yes, I was beaten up. But it gave me the chance to be released in that exchange. So, people who were not highlighted, they stayed there. And now there are service persons who were apprehended before February 24th. They are still in the 32nd penal colony in Makiyivka. And I don't even see a chance that I will get them released when there are so many people in captivity now. After February the 24th, the situation changed, and if we, let's say, if we mention every name, well, maybe they will, that would help. But if we say highlight one person from the 36th Brigade, unless it's a commander, everyone knows the name of Baranjuk, but then maybe there will be some additional pressure on that one person. But overall, if you hear that, well, if you tell about the service person, his price would be higher, they would not want to exchange him, it's not a new story. We've heard this even before February the 24th. The families should decide on their own, whether they want to highlight the name or not, whether it will bring positive consequences or not. But I say it's important for the families to talk, not about specific names, but they must talk about the condition and the environment. Because we talk with international reporters and the experts, and during our international trips abroad, there's the impression that the Russians take Ukrainian service persons as prisoners of war, and then they just return them in batches. So, well, there's nothing wrong with it. They keep returning, don't they? So, there's no understanding of even the sheer amount of people in captivity. And of course, as it says in the Geneva Convention, they might be there in captivity until the end of the conflict, but all of the POWs who are wounded or traumatized or have mental disorders, they have to be returned, because we know that some people tried to commit suicide, and we have to know where they are. We have to know the location where they are kept, and the representatives of humanitarian organizations should be allowed there, even if it's ICRC. If we don't talk about this, if we don't say that we are finding these locations, because it was only us who found 42 places of captivity, and perhaps others, for example, they would say more. You know, for example, there was this fact then, the place of production was erased from all the products that were given to the POWs, so that they would not know in which region they are. Another thing,
I think the Ukrainian law enforcement bodies and the Prosecutor General, they should take note of the witness statements, and there should be people responsible for transferring the POWs into the locations where they were subjected to torture, and those who died because of the improper conditions. So people must be held accountable for that. So we can't say that, well, if we are silent, then they might be released. Yeah, one person might get released, but there are other people there who are being tortured by the chief of that colony. We know there were cases when the chief of the colony was drunk, just opened the cell, started beating everyone there, and has beaten one cellmate to death. We have to talk about it. Tatiana, with regards to the map, I would like to ask a question. This online map, how can we look at it? It might be important for someone. Yes, we've created this online map. It's available openly. The link should be somewhere. There's the QR code. You can follow the QR code and open the map. And it's also going to be published on our website. I think this information would be really interesting for the investigators or our international partners, because we know that the law enforcement agencies of other countries are helping with the investigation. We are also happy to respond, to facilitate all the investigations, trying to find the witnesses and people responsible. A question from Galko Katarina, Espresso TV channel. So, how many places in the territory of Russian Federation are used for the Ukrainian POWs? If you have a specific figure, how many of these places are in Ukraine, and where do they have the most? In the infographics, there are 42 places of captivity. These are places from which we managed to interview the released POWs. There might be more, so we do not stop. We'll keep asking, we'll keep trying to find the POWs, and we'll add to this interactive map. With regards to the occupied territories of Ukraine, I'm not ready to respond specifically. Previously, there were, overall, there was 100. So in the occupied territories, there are bigger places like the colony in Orlivka or Sukhodilska, colony in Luhansk Oblast. They are huge facilities, where in some of those the Ukrainian POWs are in cells, in others they are in these big barracks, and that actually is resembling these POW camps more. Of course, some conditions could be better, but at least that resembles the POW camp more. But the Russian Federation, they almost don't have that on their territory. Very often they are held in jails. So they have liberated jails from regular criminals, and the cells are being overflown with POWs. Responding to your question, I would like to say the problem is not even that Ukraine is failing to respond or ICRC is not doing something, but these organizations cannot come to the territory of the Russian Federation and do some inspection. They cannot force the way in. It is only possible if Russia enables them to do that. So, of course, there's a question of how can they force Russia into giving this opportunity, but then there will be some channel of communication. So the event like this one or other events, for example, they had this conclusion, and the Russian Federation now is at least trying to respond. And I would also like to mention one thing. There is a legal notion, there is the protecting powers. The protecting power is essentially the intermediary state through which the information is exchanged. We don't have it. But in the Geneva Convention, they provide that the report goes to the protecting power, but unfortunately we don't have one. So if we don't have it, we have to find someone who can do that. It can be the UN, the ICRC, or some other body. So there should be something that would de facto perform the task of the protecting power. That is why it's important to contact different UN bodies and to highlight, not as the reporters said that like we have to disclose every name, but no, we have to make the issue visible to the international bodies so that they would have it in their reports and registers, and then there'll be more accountability, and then they will keep asking, how come we were interested in that person and the situation deteriorates? So it would be not only us who are trying to move the situation, but these international bodies too. The microphone. Yeah, there should be some new body that would be dealing with POWs, so that they would get some intermediary between Ukraine and Russia, like diplomats, who would be able to monitor these exchanges. Because often it's said that the Ukrainian authorities are preparing an exchange, but then this exchange is cancelled by the Russian side. So if Russia is at fault, well, this international body would be able to say that, okay, so Russia is not exchanging the POWs. There are also many civilians. So why is the world silent about this? Why is it not discussed on high levels? Natalia? I would like to comment on the protecting power. The problem is that, according to the international humanitarian law, two parties should agree that that state is a protecting power. Ukraine, I think, has asked all the states to be protecting powers. The problem is that Russia would not recognize any state as a protecting power. It's a matter of principle for them. So it's only the UN and ICRC who can do it. Whether they're effective or ineffective, this is the agenda for now. I think Ukraine should take more initiative at the international level, because, as was said, indeed, when we come, when we talk about the prisoners, the members of parliament, the members of the European Parliament, and sometimes, or quite often, there's the impression that they hear this for the first time. But how many? When we give them even the minimal account, it's the first time they hear that people died in captivity. I mean, not just those who were wounded, but those who were healthy upon capture. They die. So I think Ukrainian diplomacy should take more initiative, should be more aggressive, should pressure the European countries so that they would be able to pressure Russia. And in order to do this, we need Ukrainian government to develop the solutions, to put proposals to the European countries. If you want to propose something, you should also propose a solution. How can the members of the European Parliament pressure Russia? Because yes, Russia is still a member of many international organizations, and there are economic leverages too. The time runs out quickly. We have a question. Суспільне.
TV in the colonies. There are a lot of POWs and civilians who are kept in Russia and who are tried in Russia, and they get convicted often for terrorism. So what is your opinion on these trials, and what is the chance for those who have been convicted by Russia to return to Ukraine? Yes, like recently, last week, we have studied the register of the court of Rostov. I have found over 50 Ukrainian service persons' names, and the trials are only starting. We know that the day before one of these trials also started. It was over the Vedmid group. In brief, whichever verdict is passed on the occupied territory, on the territory of the Russian Federation, it does not affect the process of the exchange and return of prisoners. An example, last week we learned about the beginning of the trial. Over 24 Azov members or former Azov members in Rostov, and there were 20 of them being tried. 2 were unable to attend due to health condition, and 2 were exchanged as part of the exchanges. One last autumn, and the other was exchanged this spring. So it does not affect anything. We must understand, according to the Geneva Convention, the POWs for both of the sides, they can be kept until the end of the hostilities. And if we talk about criminal trials, until the end of the trial. But I agree that, in fact, if they try to prosecute, it doesn't matter. These people might be released in exchanges. We saw these examples. And I've been talking a lot to Andrei, and I would like to add that the military service persons, they can be tried by another state if they are suspected in war crimes. Ukraine also had these trials. The other hand is that the Russian Federation is inventing these crimes often, but it doesn't affect the exchanges. But when I checked this Rostov court register, I saw that people are tried of terrorism. I think it's Article 205 of the Russian Penal Code. And Ukrainian service persons or former service persons are tried for being a part of Azov or Donbass Battalion or IDAR. And there they are tried not for the war crime, but they are tried for the participation in hostilities. Oh yes, in brief, as Tatiana said, the Russian Federation has this register, and if the person is part of this register, then automatically they are recognized as terrorists for simply belonging to the register, regardless of the factual circumstances. So we'll have to follow these trials and to send appeals within Russia and also to contact the UN, because we need the UN, as the Russian Federation is a member of the UN. It has signed additional protocol which allows certain procedures. We need the UN to cancel the verdicts of these Russian courts. Use the microphone, please. So, it's Fakti newspaper. Question to Tatiana. You've mentioned a case when the chief of colony was drunk and killed a prisoner of war. Could you explain more details about this case? Were there any consequences for the chief?
In brief, luckily or unfortunately, I didn't have access to the place of captivity. I talked to a service person who was a witness, who saw who heard what is happening in the cell next door. It wasn't in their cell. There were no repercussions. Well, in general, in the Russian Federation, they do have inspections, which happen sometimes. Some top brass is coming, and then they try to improve the conditions for the prisoners. But overall, there's no access of independent experts to the places of captivity. Where exactly that happened, I cannot tell you that. Please pay attention. They are trying to cover their faces, and they make all POWs stand facing down. And it means they're afraid. Thank you so much. Thank you for this deep and detailed discussion. Thank you so much for your work, dear colleagues, and thank all the attendees for the interest in this topic. And we also appreciate the Defense Forces of Ukraine for giving us the opportunity to have these meetings. I hope all our heroes will come back alive, and glory to Ukraine.